Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, we are going to work on, amongst other things, the engine cradle for the Subaru EZ30R twin turbo swapped 69 Porsche 911. So guys, I have tons of updates for you, especially regarding the Blasphemy build and the Subaru engine swap. I have decided that I'm going to have a booth at the Los Angeles Toy and Lit Show, which is one of the biggest. We call it the Super Bowl of Porsche here in Southern California. All of the different big Porsche shops do open houses leading up to this event. And then the actual event, which is on Saturday, February 24th, is basically a vendor type swap meet inside a hotel near LAX. And it's some of the rarest, coolest items you can get for these vintage Porsches. So if you want like a manual for a 1959 Porsche Speedster or something, you know, you spend like $2,500 because it's your concours car, that's where to get it. Now, I've decided, just to make people clutch their pearls, I'm going to have a booth demonstrating my Subaru Swap Kit at this very, very Porsche-phile event. So that should be fun. But what it's done, it's also really lit a fire for me to get the actual engine and everything I need in the kit really dialed in. So that is the impetus for today's show. Paul, can you grab me that cross member, please? If you would. Who is Paul, you say? Hey, it's our old friend Paul from Ingenuity Official. Once again, a year ago, Paul was the man that helped me with the wiring. They got this beautiful twin turbo Subaru fired up last year. And now we're doing a full thrash for about 5 days on a whole bunch of other systems on the car. So expect a few Blasphemy build videos coming out. So this bad boy has been bugging me a little bit. The engine is supported with a cradle I built like 3 years ago. And it was very rudimentary, and it's not the final cradle, but I was very worried that there was nothing really holding the engine up in the back, because the Subaru mounts are sort of right where the transmission interfaces with the engine. So there's nothing like on the back, which means that the whole engine could kind of rock. So you've got a Subaru engine in your Time Attack CRX you've built.
Yes.
And you guys should please, for the love of God, go subscribe to Ingenuity Official, doing very cool things on his channel. Here's the same, right? It's got basically that engine mount, like underneath.
Same mounting style as the Boxer engine with the transmission.
Right. What I want to do here is I want to build sort of a universal bracket that fits into the Porsche chassis in the factory mounting points. But I want that bracket to be able to accommodate something so we can hold up the back of the Subaru engine as well. Now, my Blasphemy build is a little bit different than a stock car because I don't have a lot of the factory mounts. So what we're going to do here is, at the very least, we're going to build this bracket the way that I'm going to want the bracket on all of the swaps. That way I can use send, cut, send to laser cut the parts, and it's going to be super cool. We will have to make custom gussets on my car to mount this because mine doesn't have the factory mounts. That's okay. We will get it to work on both, and then basically I'll create this top part here, and we'll figure out something for the bottom. We don't know what that is yet. I would like something to support my turbos as well as the engine from rocking in the engine compartment. So that's our goal. And I'll show you what we have to work with and what we're gonna do. All right, so Paul is sort of demonstrating where this would fit on a factory car. This thing has the engine mounts in the corner, and there's bushings in there to accommodate for a little bit of movement. So I basically wanna recreate this, at least on the top side, and then figure out how it's going to interface with the Subaru to make sure that the engine itself is secure. So using this pile of stuff we have, we've got some 1/8 inch plate steel. I've got a nice little chunk of angle iron, also 1/8 inch. I've got a 1 inch rusty pipe, and then a couple of these nice washers. So we're going to combine all of this into something that looks a lot like that. The idea is to make it repeatable and jiggable. So once it's done, I'm going to create a jig so that I can do this every single time I get a new order for one of my swap kits. So that's the plan. And we're going to start by just kind of measuring and cutting and seeing what we can do to weld this thing together. So this is die chem. This is something you spray on metal, and then you can use a scribe to get a really precise line. You see this really precise line? Instead of doing something like a Sharpie, this gives you a much sharper line. Okay, after a whole bunch of cutting and grinding, and by the way, you guys might have noticed that I was using these pieces as a guide for the cutting wheel, and it gives you a really nice straight edge when you do that. Between scribing it with this die chem and then using a straight edge on the edge, you can actually get some really nice precise cuts this way. So these are basically the components that are cut. So I've got this nice piece of angle iron. It's the correct width. We've got now our 1-inch tubing that goes on the end. We've got these washers that we need to weld, and the process now is going to be basically just to clean all this stuff up. And I think to do that, we'll probably end up mounting some sort of bolt with a couple of washers so we can put this thing into a drill and then get a 3M scrubby or some sandpaper on it to get this really cleaned up. I'm going to probably cut these pieces like this and then some kind of little V this way as well, so that we have like a nice straight side here, and then this will just sort of come in and look a little better than having this weird kind of squared off thing right there. So I don't have a lathe in my shop, and I have some very rusty pipe. So what I'm going to do here is I have this little piece of round rod, and all I got to do, put a washer on each end, put a bolt on it. I'm going to use a drill mounted in a vise as the lathe, and I have a helper. But if you don't have a helper, you can use a zip tie. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but this is just enough to get some sandpaper in. So let's do it. It's 120 grit paper.
No. Stand by.
No, every battery's dead, so that'll have to do for now. Yeah. All right, there we go. Much better. All right, you guys may notice, terrifyingly enough, I have the TIG torch out for this. I'm going to try to continue to work on my TIG skills, and this stuff is all really thick, which is a little easier, obviously, to TIG. As usual, TIG is very picky, so I've got some acetone to wipe the parts off with, as well as some paper towels. I've got this thing at about 100 amps, 105 amps. This stuff is pretty thick, and I'm also outside, which is a little bit breezy, so we'll see if I can even do it here. I may actually need to go inside to do this. Basically, I'm gonna tack it, rotate it, tack it, rotate it, and then, lay it on its side and try to get a nice bead on it all the way around. All right, one down. Predictably not great. It's okay. It'll hold. You see that? I do have a really hard time on curved surfaces like this. So for a very amateur TIG welder, I'm very challenged by it. I'm sure you'll have tips. But I'm going to do the other one. This sort of got progressively better as I went, which is a good thing. And hopefully now I'll be able to just sort of do it, rotate, do it, rotate, do it, rotate, and make it work and be a little better than this one. But it's on, it's not going anywhere. Guys, I don't want to brag, but these TIG welds are like some of the best you've ever seen. You can check them out here. They're like, wow, like full Instagram weld porn. So they're good, they're secured. Now we're gonna figure out how to size it correctly for the cross member. And I have some ideas around it of what I'm gonna do. I may bolt the cross member to these, essentially using the cross member as a jig, which I think is gonna be the best move, because then I have the spacing perfect. Let's start there. So we've set up this makeshift jig. I've got the actual cross member in the vise. I've got our newfangled ends bolted, basically mirrored to the original one. We've got our piece here generally where it's supposed to be. I'm using some bolts as spacers, so they're the same height. I've got a magnet here basically holding it all together. And now I'm gonna make an attempt to tack it with the MIG, because I can't really use TIG for this because it's too far away. This is too much of a gap for TIG, certainly my skill level of TIG. So I'm going to tack it and then probably go back through and do a nice little MIG weld and get that sorted before we weld this piece on. Woo-hoo-hoo! Hold on. Those are hot. Yowza.
Fun fact, if you weld something, it generally tends to increase in temperature.
All right, it's the moment of truth. Are you pointing at my navel, or what are you? Have you done this before? This is the part I'm talking from. All right, it's the moment of truth. We're going to try to see if this thing fits on the stock Porsche 911 motor mounts. Like butter. All right, sweet. So this is there. All right, so here's why I did it the way I did it. I've got two surfaces. I've got a flat surface on top so that if I need to bolt a bracket from this motor mount to the top of the Subaru engine, because that seems to be where all of the bolt holes are that we can use, then I've got a pretty easy way to do that. Put a bolt right through here, make a bracket, stick it on. And then the bottom side here, I'm gonna weld on that triangle plate that I just designed, and this will become the bracket to like hang the stock exhaust from. So I'm gonna basically do this, basically at the beginning, I'm gonna do it just for the initial piece, and then we're gonna sort of fit the engine in and see what has to be adapted from it. But this one, the prototype one, is gonna go right into the blasphemy build. Here's our situation, and this is great. I'm stoked about this so far. I've got this nice thing. I've got a little gusset that I welded on in the end here. This thing fits great. I now need to weld this piece to this piece. I'm gonna try to TIG it. I'm gonna get TIGgy with it again. Paul is dropping the engine down so we have a little bit of space to make some brackets to mount this bad boy on, because I actually have no motor mounts on the blasphemy build. That is long gone. And that's a function of having the huge Porsche G96 transmission. All of the swap kits have typically 915s or 901s, so it's not a problem. This is going to be built for the swap kit, so that's what's very exciting about all of this. All right, guys, it's the next day, and Paul is applying for sainthood by going through all the wiring and basically looming everything so it looks great and is obviously solid and will be secured to the car. And here's what I've been working on. I have made, thanks to Paul's templates from yesterday, I've got these gussets that we're going to weld into the corners of the blasphemy build. And here's the brace that I built yesterday, and it looks pretty good. You can see that I sort of finished it with some gussets, and I actually did a nice little getting tiggy with it. I tigged this whole thing because I thought it would be some nice practice, which it is. And it's okay, I would like it a little straighter. I actually ordered an upgraded torch. My torch doesn't have a flexible head, so it's sometimes really hard to get the right angle as you're trying to weld. So I'm hoping that this flexible torch and a really light hose will make it a little easier to TIG, especially like around these headers and things like that. But big surprise for the next video, I'd like to welcome Willwood as a sponsor of the Blasphemy build, which I'm super excited about. We have three kind of main things I'm still waiting for. One was a brake pedal assembly and reservoirs. One was a clutch I've still got to do, and then one is a shifter in addition to the seats. So I have the seats handled, and I think I have the pedal assembly handled. So let's have a look at it. So this is one of the reservoirs, which are dope. They're gonna look rad up in the front. We've got a bunch of master cylinders here that will mount to the pedals, but we'll get to those. Very excited, you guys. Master cylinders mount here, and then we're gonna have to figure something out for the drive-by-wire, but these are like legit race car brakes, which I'm super excited about. All right, here we are. I've got this plate in, and we are centered, and they're sort of temporarily mounted here. So I need to take these gussets, which are right now 18 gauge sheet metal, and transfer them onto a much thicker metal plate so we can make these gussets and get ready to weld them onto the corners of the car. Then we'll have a beautiful support structure. All right, what I've done here is I've cut and refined one of them, then clamped them together, drilled the mounting hole through both. Now I've got it very securely bolted up. Then I can use my cutting wheel now to use this as a template and cut the other one out. Keep it bolted together so that I can sort of finish both edges, and that way I can have two completely identical parts. Not as good as laser cutting it from Send Cut Send, but I ain't got that kind of time right now. Kids, we have two really nice matched mirrored brackets. Not too bad for homebrewed. All right, dudes and dudette. We are tacked in roughly. It's actually really difficult to get any sort of purchase in here in terms of welding, because you just can't get to that inside lip at all. But I'm going to try to weld this seam here and probably get underneath the car to fully weld it as much as I can, because that way I can at least get to each side underneath. Just don't know that I can get to the inside with any effectiveness. All right, now that we are in the car and I've got the cross member bolted in, you can sort of see why I need it. Not only do I want something to secure the yaw of the engine so I can run like a bracket between here and here, but I've got my coolant crossover pipe here. This is obviously just a prototype, but it's gonna come out of here at the right depth. I'll probably notch this a little bit so it fits in there nicely. Then I have these really cool P-clamps to hold it in place. Then on the bottom side, I've got something to secure my turbos to. So I can make a bracket from one or two of these bolts and secure it to this thing as well. So this thing's gonna be sort of double duty, and that's why it's a thing. All right, dudes, that was our rear cross member build. Because we are sort of mid-thrash here, I imagine that I'm going to try to get the videos out more frequently, but they'll be a little more specific. So that was just the rear cross member. It still needs a bunch of customization and finalization, but good to go. Next video, I think we're going to try to start tackling the braking system. I've got that beautiful Willwood pedal set up, so we've got to get that thing working. Got to figure out the drive-by-wire and get that functional. I've got all of the reservoirs to mount in the front. So pretty much everything regarding the brakes, which there are 0 installed at the moment. There's literally no lines in the car. Nothing has ever been mounted in this car. So I have to run all the factory lines. I have basically a factory brake line kit that I got from Euro Parts like 3 years ago. And it's perfect and OEM and it looks great. But I have to A, sort out where all of the hard lines go, and B, make sure that all the junctions are correct, all the lines to the actual brake calipers are correct, etc., etc., etc. So that's probably going to be next video, but we have a lot to do, and we're continuing to crank on it. Thank you guys as always for watching. We'll talk to you next time.